So you need to be able to actually assess what your issues are, tackle the problems, look at your stats, kind of figure out where your liability issues are, which is your number one thing is your liability issues. Because what my condition was when I took over the evidence section was to take the liability away from the evidence clerks and personnel and put it on to me, because that's the person who is supposed to be on to.
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
Last September, we hosted a free 4-day event titled Forensic Supervisor Success Summit, designed to help you thrive in a forensic supervisory position by setting goals, optimizing resources and skills, and getting organized. 768 registrants from 38 states and 14 countries were able to learn from 28 speakers and listen to 32 presentations. It was so wildly successful that we plan on hosting another one this year. But while we're preparing for the big event, we wanted to give you something to listen to while you wait. So every month this summer, we'll be featuring a presentation from the 2022 Forensic Supervisor Success Summit. On this bonus episode, we'll be kicking things off with a guest interview with Larry Stringham titled Prioritizing When You Supervise Multiple Forensic Units. Larry is a retired forensic and evidence supervisor from the Cape Coral Police Department and presently sits on the board of directors for the International Association for Identification and serves as the conference planner for the Florida division of the IAI. Nowadays, you can find Larry teaching forensic training courses. And if you love this episode, we know you'll love the other presentations too. The presentations featured on Forensics Unfiltered make up only 15% of the entire summit. You can get instant access to replays for all 32 presentations in the All Access Pass on gapscience.teachable.com. We'll include all of the links in the show notes, but again, you can go to gapscience.teachable.com and click on the All Access Pass. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Larry. We're very excited to have you. I know you have a lot of years of experience in the forensic world and you're very active, but just in case we have some people that may not be able to recognize your face, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, my name is Larry Stringham. I'm retired now from the Cape Coral Police Department for 25 years. I've done forensics for 30 years, multidiscipline supervision for 15. I was in the United States Air Force. I'm a board member of the II, a distinguished member and former president of the FDII. Used to own my own company. I'm now an instructor for TriTech, and I was an accreditation manager at the Cape Coral Police Department as well as the supervisor. So I think that would hit every button that needs to be hit.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your experience as a supervisor and maybe how that started?
Well, that's a funny story because I actually got the job as communication supervisor at the Cape Coral Police Department. I needed more money, and like everybody else did, and then I applied for the job because I had fire investigation and I had communication skills through the United States Air Force as a dispatcher for Hernando County Sheriff's Office. So the major walked in, or I guess he was the deputy chief at that time. He walks in my office and he goes, "I can't lose you for forensics, so how about I make you the supervisor of forensics and evidence?" Basically, it was time and opportunity to hit me the right way. I'm in love with forensics, as anybody knows about me. They would know that, and so I accepted it right there and then, and I've been doing it. Well, had been doing it since until I retired.
What were the units like that you supervised? Like what condition were they in? Did they need a little bit of TLC, or were they well established, or how big were they?
Well, the forensic unit was pretty near perfect because I was in charge of it. And so I would say, now I started off in Cape Coral as a one-man unit, and I had aspirations, but it all depends on if your city grows or not, depending on how big. So my jurisdiction at that time was like 70,000 people in the city. So I was a one-man show, but I could see that the potential of growth was there. And I had supervision experience in the Air Force and other places. So I kind of tailored the unit so that it would run symmetrically with where the state is running and the best practices and stuff. Because when I got there, they didn't even have a camera, not even a print kit. They didn't have, I walked in that day with just me. I had a loop, but that was it. But
I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially like some of our past students.
So the evidence section was pretty much ran by a sergeant or lieutenant who they passed on to another sergeant lieutenant. No one really knew the job. No one really knew what needed to happen. Inspections, audits, they weren't being done because no one knew they were supposed to be done. So when I took over, I was actually the backup for the Hernando County Sheriff's Office's property unit. So I knew a lot of the state laws, 705, 119, different things like that. So I was able to actually start functioning them into a greater unit and actually have purpose, if you want to put it that way. I'm also a supervisor of the background checks for the city of Cape Coral. Now, how I got working for HR, I literally have no idea. But they just said fingerprints. Oh, that's Larry. We were doing that, so I had a couple employees there, and at one time I was in charge of like 13 to 14 volunteers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that actually is a lot more stress related than the other one.
Yeah, I'm sure. So we had the forensic unit that was pretty well established, and then you had these other units that you were gifted that probably need a little bit of TLC. Let's try to focus on maybe just managing one type of unit, and then we're going to talk about transitioning to managing multiple types of units.
Sure.
So when you manage a single unit, how do you determine like what types of tasks or projects take priority over others? Like how do you determine what you need to tackle first?
That's a really good question, and it's multiple answers that actually can answer this question. But I think first of all, if you're a brand new supervisor coming in, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are a few things that are going to be good that they're doing, and there's a few things that won't fit your need or your assessment. So you need to be able to actually assess what your issues are, tackle the problems, look at your stats, kind of figure out where your liability issues are, which is your number one thing is your liability issues. Because what my condition was when I took over the evidence section was to take the liability away from the evidence clerks and personnel and put it onto me, because that's the person who is supposed to be gone to. Also, I brought them into time-sensitive material. Before they just kind of did what they did, and before they didn't have no timelines. So I actually established timelines when things were required, action dates, things like that. And the other one that they did, but they never understood the importance of it, is staff requested requests. So when the chief wants you to do something, he's not looking for you to do it on Tuesday. He's looking for you to do it while you're still in the office. So
right.
Understanding that there is a little bit of office politics, and although it doesn't run into your timeline, it does run into your timeline. So you have to make it that timeline.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when you start being a supervisor with a forensic unit that maybe didn't have those connections well established, you're kind of trying to build better bridges with your chain of command.
It's true, because you really don't know. And the problem with coming over to a new department, which is what I did when I came to Cape Coral, is that you don't know who your friend is, and you don't know who your foe is, and you don't know who's playing the politics games which way. And so it's a learning process that you just kind of sit back, stay back a little bit, and let the problems come to you instead of you go to the problems. Basically is the best analogy.
I think that's a great piece of advice, because I think some people get very excited and they want to change a lot of things at once and just kind of rush into things. Whereas like you really should really assess what the issues are, like what the dynamics are at that agency, and then try to figure out like what you can work in and when is an appropriate time to do it.
Yeah, time is really the essence of everything that we're going to talk to you about today, and knowing when time is and what time it's not time to do things. Like you don't start things on Christmas week. It's just a stupid way of doing something. So knowing your time and when it's a good applicable time to do it, maybe at the beginning of the year when you have that January, February lull in time. There's stuff that supervisors should keep in mind when they're actually going to do task force things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Great pieces of advice. So now let's talk about when you're transitioning from maybe a unit you're more familiar with to now you have multiple units and maybe you don't have the knowledge base for some units like you do others. How do you start with that, and what can you do to divide your time evenly?
I've always been curious about divide your time evenly. That's a very great statement because I've heard this all my career in my supervisor classes that I've taken, and I go to a different analogy on it, just as Larryism, by the way. Everything is basically it's either fair or equal, and I really lived by this. If you're doing things fairly, you're making sure that everyone gets a shake at it at their own rate. If you're doing everything equally, that means everyone gets the exact same thing. So if you're in a unit that needs a little bit more of attention, a little bit more push or stuff like that, then allot them more time in your day than you would do the other things that you do, like supervisor reviews or things like that for your crime scene unit, if you're a crime scene person. And a lot of times, if you get them to do, and we may talk about this later on too, ownership of that project, you won't have to spend so much time there because they're actually going to be focused on material, and you're not going to have to do that as much. I've always believed that when you're actually dealing with people, you deal with them fairly. When you're dealing with their pay or their time off and stuff, you deal with them equally. So you can do things both in the same direction, but you actually have to be cognizant of what you're doing at the time. And I can give an example of this. I had one employee who was having an issue with the barcoding and placement of the items. So I normally would say, well, you have an hour in the morning to be able to slot your items in. That should be plenty of time. I actually went and said, okay, you have 2 hours, because what I want you to do is I want you to double check your material after you're done with it. And then when you get comfortable enough with your double checking, we'll go back to single checking. It's funny that evidence, the minimum requirement is perfection. So
yes, absolutely.
So if you're not doing these checks and quality control and different things like that, you're actually losing out on the end run, by the way.
I think that's so good. So like, in order to get the result that you need, you have to implement, those maybe not like hard and fast rules. You have to kind of have some wiggle room.
Well, what I've always used an analogy when I teach my classes is that what if you had twins? One of the twins took a little bit of little extra for education, but the other kid was very highly motivated and very bright and could test really well. Well, to make things fair, you're going to have to give the first child a little bit more educational referencing backgrounds, maybe a tutor, different things, while the other one doesn't need it. So Although it doesn't seem like it's equal, because it's not, it's the fair thing to do so that they both have the same footing to be able to go to college and do other things like that. So that's
good.
The idea of the fair versus equal.
I love that analogy. And regardless if you have you're in a position where you have multiple units, or you're in a position where you just have one unit and multiple people underneath of you, like, I think that's such a good thing to make sure that you remember. Okay, so there are definitely instances, like I know Erin's going through it right now, where she has units that are running smoothly and she has one that's just like needs all of the help. So how can you determine which units will have to be prioritized over other units? Because there's going to become a day where you can't divide your time amongst, all of the units that are underneath of you. You have to focus more on one versus the other.
Well, I've had that issue as well. And I think what I did was I tried to, at first, at the beginning of the day, is make sure that I meet with them as a personal overview. Instead of being a boss, I was Larry, but Larry with a purpose. So I would go down to the evidence room after I worked out in the morning, and I would say, hey, guys, what's going on? And then we would talk about Van Halen, or we would talk about the latest Beanie Baby or whatever that was. And then we would have a conversation about that. And then as I'm sitting there listening to them, I'm also listening to their point of view, their emotions of that day. Did they have problems at home and things like that? So that's the first thing I would do. And I would do that. I'd go upstairs into forensics and I would do the same thing. And then I would go down to background checks and I would do the same thing. And that would be about my first hour of the day. So I have assessed now what the work conditions in the workplace basically are going to be. So that allows me to prioritize the information. It could be complex if they're in a good mood, or it could be rather just trugging along like you had to every day if it is a bad mood. And it really did help me out through the years because I went into the evidence unit and I split them into 4 jobs, which they switched every month. So the quality control position was kind of like the supervisor there. That person I would bring up into my office about once a week, and we would just have a conversation about how everything's going, any problems, we have any checks, any problems, and they would give me checklists and stuff like that. So I think to your question is prioritization. Is that what the question was?
Yeah, like how do you like prioritize the needs of one unit versus the other? But it sounds like touching base with every single person, even though you're not like giving them the most of your time that week, you're still showing that you care. And I think that's super important. So they understand like, okay, Larry has to focus on this other problem with this other unit right now, but he still cares about me.
Correct. That's exactly where the situation came from. And then during that day, I'd say, all right, I have accreditation assessments that I have to do for the first 2 hours. There's no choice about it. As a young supervisor or a new supervisor, the hardest thing you're able to do is actually prioritize your time. Time is the enemy and the ally of your life. Supervisors, especially, I was a working supervisor, so I still got overtime, but I would never put in for overtime. If I couldn't do my job in 8 hours, then what am I doing there in the first place? But new supervisors seem to have that ability to get lost in the weeds. That's where your prioritization, you have to look at your 2-hour time slot and say, okay, I gave 2 hours to do this project. I'll give 2 hours tomorrow, but now I need to move to the next project. And if I could be so bold to also say, that means not answering your emails, not answering your text messages. That means not answering your phones. That means prioritizing your time to that project that needs individualization.
I'm so glad you said that because we present that idea in our supervision course and people think we're nuts. They're like, you know, people depend on me answering that email. And it's like, but then you never get anything done.
Well, not only that, but what you're doing is your prioritization is of your text messages or your emails, not of what your job is doing. And a lot of people look at it and say, but I can multitask. Can you really? If the person's saying they need this done immediately and you're trying to do something with another job you're trying to do immediately, can those both be done at the same time? So I've always slotted like at 11:30 to about 12:30, depending on when I did my lunch. I answered all my emails, all my phones, and then I would do the same thing at 3 o'clock later that day. And everyone got answered. Everyone's information got done. It just wasn't done to the immediate that they're used to from everyone else.
That's so good. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's definitely something that people need to hear more of.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges we see is supervisors have taken over units with lots of problems. There's lots of fires to put out that need to be fixed right away. So do you have any suggestions for how to tackle these challenges without neglecting like other units or other duties that you're expected to, you know, complete throughout the week?
I do, but it takes a lot of footwork for the new supervisor, which you need to actually prioritize the material that of your fires that are going on. Sometimes they're just smoldering, and sometimes they're big fires. I went over to another department to assist them in an audit, and they had a lot of fires. So basically, I said I couldn't do this audit because there's no way to audit you the way everything is right now. So what I need you to do is do these simple steps. This is what I need to do first. And then you prioritize the fires that basically going on. And I think normally what you'll find out is that a lot of the fires are connected to each other. You have a commonality to the fire going on. And if you fix the root cause of what's going on over here in this fire, this other fire will go out almost immediately.
I think sometimes too is people become very influenced by other people in the unit. So like I know some of the staff members might think that their fire is bigger than what it really is. And same thing with even the chain of command, maybe because they don't really understand like the liabilities of the evidence unit and the forensic unit. So they don't understand like some fires are really big fires and this fire over here, like I understand it's pissing you off or you get very frustrated, but it's really not that big of a deal and we can tackle that later.
Well, I had a circumstance years ago when I first became a supervisor. In fact, this might be the first thing I ever did as a supervisor that was derogatory. I had an employee lose a piece of homicide evidence and in the evidence section. And, that's not acceptable. And so I said, you've got 3 days to find this. You need to go through this row and this row. So the second day that I came in, he had his feet on the desk. He was reading the newspaper. And he does this every morning, though. And I looked at him and go like, do you think this is the most effective way to buy your time? And basically goes like, it'll show up. It's no big deal. And I'm going like, I have to present this to the state attorney that we're missing this piece of evidence within the third day. That's my policy.
Clearly it wasn't clicking that this is a big fire.
No, he no longer worked for us after a while. So
that's sometimes what has to happen.
Well, the fire should have been underneath the feet. And if he would have given the greatest effort into finding that, looking under every stone, I probably wouldn't have gone to the direction that I went to, but his care for the value, and it was just a CD case. That's all it was. But it was listed as an individual item. It was fingerprinted. So it had background to it. And I'm going, right. I'm sorry, this is not going to work for you.
Yes, that's such a good lesson to learn. So as you're managing more and more people, you can probably expect to have more and more stress. So do you have any suggestions for supervisors out there on ways to deal with their daily workload and also like manage their stress so it's not leaking into every single part of their life?
Well, I take a lot from what I did in forensics as well, being that I worked there for 30 years. I never took anything home with me. And I think the stress is related to, you're going to have stress when you're at work. That's part of the job. You're going to have to deal with that. But I've always looked at them and I said, it's not personal. No one's doing this to you on purpose. What you need to be able to do is focus on what you're doing at the present time and try to alleviate the stress that is necessary, because I'm not giving you an unfair or an unwarranted project or timeline. I think with more employees, though, I think we look at it as like, okay, I got to deal with everyone the exact same way. And I think that's what new employees do, new supervisors. And let's go back to the fair and equal part of this. If you have an employee that's been there, and I had one employee that was there with me for 21 years, I didn't have to look after her like I have to look after the employee that I've been there for 3 years. We would have conversations, like I said, every morning. But after a while, I would sit down with the new employee and said, hey, let's go over what is a Newton loop, or let's go over palm prints and things like that. And I would sit down with them and give them some individual time. We would talk about chemistry and different alternate light sources and, different things. And that person needed more of my time. It's not stress. I didn't find it to be stressful. I found it to be more objective, I guess would be the word.
Yeah. I think some people too, they get into the supervisory role and they think this is what they want. And we try to stress to them, like, if you want to be a supervisor, it's about the people. You have to care about the people. And some people just don't. And that's fine. So maybe this isn't for you. But like you said, like, if the thought of managing more and more people stresses you out, you may want to kind of take a look at
what you're doing.
What you're doing here. Is this really what you want?
I'm glad we kind of brought that up, because it brings onto another adage of mine, is that are we there as supervisors to make our employees happy? It's a very hard concept. And when I was last teaching, actually with Aaron just a couple of weeks ago, I brought that up, and everyone says, no, your job's not to make you happy. And I'm going like, well, whose job is it then? Whose job is it to make them content? Whose job is it to make them loyal to not only you, but to the city, to the department that you work for? That's the supervisor's probably main job. And I feel that so many supervisors get this stigma around them, like they're the boss, like you'll do what I tell you to do. But if you're compassionate and you're understanding and you give a little bit of yourself to them, like I said before, they're apt to actually have your back greater. They get projects done, seems to get done because they want to make sure that you're happy. Not that was ever a concern. And the last one is that the loyalty that you get to the department means longevity. And the one thing that new supervisors really miss out on is that if you're always training new employees, then you're not supervising. You're actually training.
Yes. And it kind of comes full circle, because when we talked about it earlier, like, what do you prioritize first? The first thing that kind of pops into my mind is, like, if you have a team that's very like dysfunctional or disgruntled, like maybe you should focus on the people more. And then once you make them content and like catch them up to speed, they can help you with all of the other fires, like processes and stuff like that you
Right.
have going on too. But if you just focus on the processes first and you completely ignore making your staff happy and content, it's kind of like an uphill battle.
Very much so. If you're a dragon slayer, which is what I refer to a person that has a whip, if you're a dragon slayer and that's all you're there to do is to make sure that the next project is completed and not why the next project is completed. And I think really, if you're going to do one thing, if I was to give one advice to a new supervisor and stuff, is give ownership to projects to the people. Let them carry the weight and let them be the hero or the goat. Now, that doesn't mean you just let them go by themselves willy-nilly and you don't do checks on them and make sure that they're going right. But nothing is more satisfying to an employee that you say, great job, and you make a big deal about it, especially the younger crowd these days.
I love that. Relinquishing control can be hard for some people, but I think, like you said, if you use it kind of as a tool to like build up other people, and it makes it so that you don't have to touch every single project in your unit, like that's how you're building a team, and that's how you start to become a leader and not just a boss.
Kind of like what I did in crime scenes. When we went to crime scenes, and I know every department does this, but they actually make a lead technician and the person who's responsible on the scene. I see so many new supervisors go out there and don't let a lead tech be a lead tech. They basically say, okay, this is what I'm telling you to do. And then you're just a tech. You're not a lead tech. What I've always tried to do is say, listen, I'm going to make sure the yellow tape's put up right. I'm going to walk in. We're going to have a conversation. You're going to tell me what you're going to do, and then I'm going to walk out. If I hear something that you forgot or something that I'd like you to do, I'm still the boss. I'm still going to tell you that. But this is your scene. This is your scene to make or break.
It can feel very weird, especially when you've been in like the lead technician role for so many years. But eventually you have to learn, like, you're not the lead tech anymore, and you're more like a support person. Like, you know, you're the one that goes and gets their equipment for them or gets them what they need, make sure that they eat and take breaks.
In fact, I had one employee that was diabetic, and I'd always carry a banana and Gatorade in my car because I've seen her when she's not fluided up or whatever you want to call it for diabetics. And so I would always say every 2 hours, I'd say, okay, time for you to get a banana.
That's wonderful. Well, I have one more question before we wrap this up. So when you're helping your units understand what a priority is, if you oversee multiple supervisors, that can be a different challenge in and of itself. How do you get buy-in from your units in regards to where the majority of their time, energy, and efforts will be devoted?
You should have come together meetings every week, even if they're just to say hello and you have nothing to say. But you should be going over the projects. And I'm going to go with crime scene for right now. You should be going over the projects of what crime scenes did we just do? Is there any commonality to it? My wife was a crime analyst. I would sit there and talk to her. I'd go, hey, I had a burglary over here. Does these kind of relate to each other? But more importantly, I would get on my office manager, who's now the supervisor of forensics, and we would sit down with the quality control manager was of that week, and then we would bring up the background check person, and we would just have a little powwow of what we were doing, what we need to accomplish, what we need to prioritize, and then I would bring in the lead technician. So by the time I was done, almost everybody in the office was in their meeting in the last place, because I just don't like when you have a meeting and you exclude somebody, because that brings up resentment that they're not being invited to the party, even though they may not have much to say. So when we were having like a homicide meeting with the detectives, my whole unit would go, and they're going like, they didn't have anything part of it. I'm going like, yeah, but they might be sending stuff off to the lab. They might be doing this. They might be doing that. We work on 2 days off, 2 days on type of a schedule. So you never know when this person you might need this person. So I hope that answers the question. Did it answer the question?
Yeah, I think it's a good habit to get into. Like you said, kind of having weekly meetings, it kind of gives you the opportunity to get on the same page so that you don't accidentally undermine your supervisors and the decisions that they're making. Like maybe you have some clarification and better understanding that you need on your end. So I think that's just like a good overall habit to get into. Is make sure you have those weekly meetings, those weekly check-ins with your supervisor, and see, are things heading in the right direction? And if they're not, you're there to help them like redirect.
And I could actually read them a little bit, because when I'm doing the morning type thing, it's more like for fun. When I'm talking about work, I can see the frustration in their work. And I had one employee years ago who basically was yelling at me to my face, which I told him, you can do. That does not bother me. Listen, nothing's personal. When you're working for the victim and I'm not doing what's right for the victim, and you see that, then yelling at me is the right thing to do. And she kind of yelled at me for a while, and I looked at her and said, you're right. You're 100% correct. I was 100% wrong with the assessment of what you're talking about. So let's reprioritize. Let's reschedule what we're doing here. And I think that would be the next advice I would give to the new employee is don't take things personal. It's very hard not to do that when they're talking to you, because they think they're talking to you, but they're talking to the supervisor. They're not talking to Larry. So
right.
You have to be able to disconnect yourself just a little bit and take a little bit, because yeah, you're the boss, but you're the boss with a purpose. You're a purpose there to work for the victim. And if you're not facilitating that victim, then you're not doing what's best for the department, for the mission, for everything involved, including the victim.
Well, I think that's all the questions that I have for you. So is there any other piece of advice or anything else that you'd like to make sure that our supervisors out there know?
That sweater vests are hard to find these days. That would be very difficult. I actually have to search high and low, and Amazon just doesn't have no, I'm just joking. But if I was to give one piece of advice for a new supervisor that was coming in, analyze your data to find out where your problems are. Don't go by what people are telling you. Go by what the math tells you. And network. Believe it or not, there's associations out there, be it the II, the FDII, which I'm board members on both, that can actually help you and assist you. And by not networking, you're limiting your ability to supervise to a greater degree. I know I've talked to Aaron, we've talked to so many other individuals around the state that I'm always ready there to assist.
That's such good pieces of advice. Like, you are not alone in this. As long as you put forth the effort to network, people are wanting and willing to help you. Yeah, and
like my adage was I'm never going to leave a secret. From everything that I knew when they came into the job, the new employees and stuff like that, I would basically say, okay, this is everything I know. You're going to know when I leave. And I would basically applaud the people that do that. I know you guys do that because you have these classes. But I've seen all the old school supervisors were like, well, I don't want to let my secret to be out. Well, what secret
right.
if you're not solving the crime? It's not a good secret.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Anybody watching this, I'm sure even if they're a seasoned supervisor, definitely can take away some good little nuggets of information and apply it to their units today. So we really appreciate you coming and talking to us.
Oh, no problem. I hope when this is aired that I'm available and I can actually answer any questions that are actually being given.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. We hope you enjoyed this bonus episode of the Forensics Unfiltered podcast. Just a reminder, if you want instant access to this guest interview and over 30 more presentations like it, get the All Access Pass at gapscience.teachable.com. The link is waiting for you in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.